How are prison sentences determined in South Africa? Imagine committing a crime, standing in a courtroom, and waiting as a judge decides your future. How does that decision happen? Is it based solely on the law, or do other factors come into play? In South Africa, sentencing is a complex process that blends strict legal frameworks with deeply human considerations. It determines whether someone goes to prison, pays a fine, or walks free. But how fair is this system, and does it always deliver justice? In a country with a history of inequality and crime, sentencing isn't just about punishment, it's about shaping society. Let's dive into the mechanics of South Africa's sentencing process, the laws that guide it, and the challenges it faces. This is a story of justice, inequality, and the fine line between accountability and compassion. In South Africa, sentencing falls squarely on the shoulders of the judiciary. Judges and magistrates are the ones who decide how a convicted person will be punished. But their decisions aren't made in a vacuum. They follow laws set out in the Constitution and the Criminal Procedure Act. The process begins after a guilty verdict, where the court hears arguments from both sides. Prosecutors push for harsher penalties, while defense attorneys plead for leniency. Judges consider these arguments, but they also rely on legal precedents, past cases that guide their decisions. However, the process isn't purely legal. Judges are tasked with balancing justice with mercy. For example, they'll consider mitigating factors, like whether the offender showed remorse or acted out of desperation. Aggravating factors, like the severity of the crime or its impact on the victim, also play a big role. Sentencing is more than just a mathematical equation. It's a careful deliberation that weighs the law against the individual circumstances of each case. This is why two people convicted of the same crime might receive very different sentences. For some crimes, judges don't have much room to maneuver. South Africa has minimum sentencing laws that prescribe fixed penalties for serious offenses. Crimes like murder, rape, and armed robbery often come with mandatory sentences, such as life imprisonment or long-term incarceration. These laws were introduced in the 1990s to combat rising violent crime and to ensure consistency in sentencing. However, minimum sentences aren't set in stone. Judges can deviate from them if there are substantial and compelling circumstances that warrant a lesser punishment. For instance, if an offender is young, acted under duress, or has no prior criminal record, a judge might impose a lighter sentence. While minimum sentencing aims to deliver justice, it has sparked controversy. Critics argue that it strips judges of their discretion and sometimes leads to overly harsh penalties. Supporters, on the other hand, see it as a necessary tool to deter serious crimes and reassure victims that justice is being served. The balance between consistency and fairness remains a contentious issue in South Africa's legal system. When determining a sentence, South African judges consider a wide range of factors. The nature and severity of the crime are always at the forefront. A violent crime like murder is likely to result in a harsher sentence than a non-violent offense like theft. Judges also look at the impact of the crime on victims and society. For instance, crimes that traumatize communities, like gang violence or sexual offenses, often carry heavier penalties. On the other hand, the personal circumstances of the offender also play a role. Their age, mental health, and background are examined to determine whether they acted with intent or under mitigating conditions. Socioeconomic factors, like poverty or unemployment, can also influence sentencing. A judge might show leniency if they believe these conditions contributed to the crime. However, this isn't always the case, as some argue that leniency might undermine the rule of law. Ultimately, sentencing is about striking a balance between punishing the offender, deterring future crimes, and promoting rehabilitation. South Africa's sentencing system isn't just about locking people up, it's also about rehabilitation. The country's constitution emphasizes the need to reform offenders and reintegrate them into society. For this reason, courts often consider alternatives to imprisonment, especially for first-time or non-violent offenders. Community service, fines, and suspended sentences are all options that allow offenders to make amends without being incarcerated. Rehabilitation is especially important in cases involving young offenders, who are often sent to diversion programs instead of prison. However, the system faces challenges when it comes to achieving true rehabilitation. Overcrowded prisons and a lack of resources make it difficult to provide meaningful programs for inmates. Critics argue that some sentences focus too heavily on punishment, neglecting the chance to address the root causes of criminal behavior. On the other hand, some believe that leniency can lead to a lack of accountability. The debate over punishment versus rehabilitation reflects the broader struggle to balance justice with compassion in South Africa's sentencing system. Despite its legal framework, South Africa's sentencing system faces significant challenges. One major issue is inequality. Wealthy offenders often have access to better legal representation, which can lead to lighter sentences. This creates a perception that justice is skewed in favor of those with resources. Overcrowding in prisons also complicates sentencing. Judges sometimes hesitate to impose long prison terms, knowing the conditions inmates will face. Another challenge is public perception. In high-profile cases, public outcry can pressure courts to impose harsher sentences, potentially undermining judicial independence. Corruption within the justice system is another concern, with instances of bribery affecting sentencing outcomes. Finally, there's the challenge of consistency. While judges strive to be fair, the subjective nature of sentencing means outcomes can vary widely. Addressing these issues requires not just legal reform but also broader efforts to tackle inequality and improve trust in the justice system. Sentencing in South Africa is a complex and deeply human process. It reflects the country's struggle to balance the need for justice with the realities of crime and inequality. On one hand, strict laws and minimum sentences aim to deter crime and protect victims. On the other hand, the system recognizes the importance of rehabilitation and second chances. The process is far from perfect, as challenges like inequality, corruption, and overcrowding continue to undermine its fairness. However, it also offers hope, a chance to address not just the crime but the conditions that led to it. Sentencing isn't just about punishing offenders, it's about shaping a society where justice is both fair and compassionate. As South Africa continues to grapple with these challenges, one thing is clear: the way sentences are determined says as much about the society as it does about the crimes committed within it. So, how are sentences determined in South Africa? It's a process that blends law, humanity, and the complexities of a nation still seeking balance in its pursuit of justice.